Right, evening everybody, and a very, very light evening it is as well. It is Tuesday the 5th of July, and it's 9:30, and it's really light outside, ridiculously so. I'm amazed my kids have gone to sleep, to be honest, or that they are still asleep, because it's really light out there. So, we did Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare on Sunday, so I'll carry on with a couple of Buffalo Traces that I've got in stock, and both of these were actually donated from the same place, which was from Nick and Kathy at the whiskey shop in Lincoln, which looks like this. Now it's called the Whiskey Shop, but it's not the same as the chain of the whiskey shop that I used to work for that are dotted around the UK. This is independent. I don't know how long they've been there, but I get the feeling that they've not been there that long, like a few years, but not an awfully long time. But really nice couple, really friendly, lovely little store. If you're ever in Lincoln, it's up towards the cathedral that's on the top of the hill. I think it's Bailgate is the name of the street. So I popped in there a few months ago and just introduced myself, never been in there before, said this is what I'm doing, more just to kind of, if you know anybody that might be interested, and leaving a card and that lot. And all of a sudden Nick turned around and gave me a few samples, of which 2 were from Buffalo Trace. So the first one I'm going to have is this one that he's printed off but didn't have any details on, so I've done a bit of digging. And this is the Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. Now EH stands for Edmund Haynes, and Edmund Haynes Jr. I'm just getting my iPod because there was something I needed to get off this. Edmund Haynes Taylor was, he's known as a founding father of the bourbon industry. He did an awful lot, sort of not unrecognised now, but sort of unrecognised at the time. He did a lot in terms of like promoting standards of bourbon and distillation, and he owned quite a few distilleries in the sort of the turn of the century, so late 1800s. And he became the owner of what was the distillery, what is now Buffalo Trace, and he called it the Old Fire Copper Distillery. And then in 1878, so he bought the distillery in 1870, called it the Old Fire Copper Distillery, and then in 1878 he actually essentially went into financial difficulties, equivalent of administration, and George T. Stagg was basically the guy that bought him out. Stagg we'll come on to in a minute. So the Buffalo Trace, in his honour, now have a range of Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. whiskies. So the one that I've got from the whiskey shop in Lincoln is the E.H. Taylor small batch. So this is released annually, a small batch of barrels. There's no age statement on it, but apparently it's about 7-year-old. It's bottled at 50%. You're looking at, in the States, you're looking at about $40, maybe as much as $50, but I did find it in a couple of places, a place called Bevfly in Florida, that was selling it for $39.99, but there was a couple at sort of $45. This is for sale at the Whiskey Exchange, and Master of Malt have got it listed as well, that they're out of stock at 95 quid, which seems quite steep. So obviously quite difficult to get hold of in the UK. Now the reason I had my iPod was I was just pulling up the Buffalo Trace website, because E.H. Taylor Jr. is actually a range from them. So there is the small batch, there is also a single barrel, a barrel proof, a straight rye, an old fashioned sour mash, a warehouse C tornado surviving, whatever that means, a cured oak, and a seasoned wood. So there is quite a few of them about, and it seems to be one, particularly looking at the bourbon groups that I'm on Facebook, they're quite sought after. So there's not a huge amount of them around, but a lot of people are after them. So this is also, and it says it on the labelling itself, this is what's known as bottled in bond. So this was a relatively new term that I came across when I spoke to Nick at the whiskey shop at the time. He gave me the sample. Now bottled in bond means that, and he had to look this up himself, means that it is distilled in one, it's from one distillery, so it's like a single malt, one distillery in one season. So whether that's, we couldn't quite figure out what a season was, but it's I guess it's like within a year. which is then put into casks and matured in a warehouse that's owned. It's like a federally owned warehouse. So this is like a warehouse that's owned by the government. Now, what this is doing is guaranteeing some kind of quality because the government are looking after it. This is actually as a result of what was the Bottling Bond Act that E.H. Taylor himself was had a hand in helping actually create this act and get it launched in 1897, because this was one of the things he wanted to guarantee quality, and essentially doing this Bottled in Bond Act was saying, look, this distillery is going to make this whiskey, and then the government are going to look after it, and they're going to hold it, and they're going to protect it for a minimum of 4 years until it gets released. So if it's bottled in bond, you know it's been looked after, you know that it has been kind of almost, you know, securely what's the word I'm looked after? It's securely protected almost by the government to ensure that nobody's buggered about with it, nobody's doing any tricks, nobody's taking it out and put other stuff in, all of this lot. You know what you are getting with that. So it's like a seal of approval, or like in the UK we've got the red line that goes on eggs, and something goes, there's like the tractor for British pork and stuff like that, and the Nintendo seal of approval that you used to get on the games, that basically meant that, you know, this is like authorised, this is, you know, this is a guarantee of quality. That's kind of what Bottled in Bond is. So, E.H. Taylor small batch. I might have sniffed a little bit too hard, but that really caught me by surprise. That was right at the back of my throat. Now it's 50%, so it's, you know, it's a pretty high alcohol percentage. But I don't think, I'm fairly confident it's not barrel proof. Cask strength, if you're talking about Scotch, barrel proof is kind of really the term for American whiskies, but it's all the same. Cask strength, barrel proof, whatever. So I'm guessing that they've knocked it down to 50 to kind of maintain some kind of consistency among the batch of barrels that they've used. But it's really quite fiery. But if I kind of give it a bit of distance, there's like a lemoniness to it, and a bit of citrus, and licorice. A bit of citrus, there's lemon in it. There's something else as well. It's a bit kind of like rhubarb and custard sweets. There's I don't know if they get them in America, but in the UK you can get rhubarb and custard, like hard candies. So it's like a sharpness and a sweetness at the same time. Now, that citrusiness I was talking about, it's slightly like, and I mean this in a good way, but it's slightly like a lemon washing up liquid, in that there's a slight sweetness to it as well, which you kind of get with washing up liquid, as well as an alcoholic cleanliness. I'm not quite sure if I'm making sense, but it's the closest I can come to that kind of, to describing the nose that I'm getting. But there's a definite citrusiness. Yes, there's a definite citrus element, but there's also like a sweetness to it as well. That sweetness continues as well, and it's nowhere near as hot on the palate as it was on the nose. Oh, that's good. That's really good. The sweetness continues, and there's like a corn. It's like sweet corn that's been cooked in sugar. So it's like a very sweet, like corn on the cob, but it's like a really, really sweet natural corn on the cob. Not necessarily been cooked on the barbecue with a caramel element to it, so when it kind of goes a bit charred, it's not quite as deep as that, but it's as if you cooked it on the cooked corn on the cob on a barbecue, and it's not charred, but it brings all the sugars out within that cob. Now I was thinking I was going to need to add water to this, particularly on the nose, and I have some water ready, mainly for the next one. But actually that's really well balanced. That's really good. There's a lovely sweetness to it, but it's quite delicate, almost floral. Now it's not as sparkly as the wheated bourbons I was having, like the W.L. Weller and the Fitzgerald. It's not quite as effervescent as that, but there's a lightness to it. There's a really light touch, and this sweetness. It's deeper than candy floss, but it's that type of sweetness to it. So it's not really sugary sweet, but it is a sweeter bourbon than I've had before. But I really like that. It's more delicate. It's a bit softer than a lot of bourbons. I was expecting it to be a bit heavier, to be perfectly honest. But it's really drinkable and light and not quite refreshing. It's not really what I'd call a summer whiskey, but it's more kind of autumn. It's not in front of a log fire. It's not too bad for this type of weather, you know, nice and sunny outside. But it's got a bit more depth to it than a very, very light summery whiskey. There's almost a sherryness to it as well, but like a medium dry sherry, as opposed to like rich sherried scotches, you know, your Macallans and your Aberlours and things like that, where it's a very rich, deep, dark sherry. This is much more of a medium dry sherry, so not quite fino, but it's got the sweetness of a medium sherry, along with not really saltiness, but the mouth drying feel of a fino sherry. That is very, very good indeed. Much more complex than I thought it was going to be. And I can see why a lot of people are going for that. Now, it would be really interesting to see what the others are like the single barrel and everything like that. From what I gather, the single barrel is about $20 more, and not necessarily $20 worth more quality. I've read a couple of picked up a couple of head-to-head reviews where they've done small batch versus single barrel. Wasn't really looking at the tasting notes, but the general consensus at the bottom was actually, you know what, the small batch for $40-50 is a really good value. And I think for $40, that is pretty good indeed. That's a fair price. It's slightly unusual as well. I really like the light touch to it as well, and the sweetness is fantastic. It's not cloying. It's not heavily sherried. It's not like a dark fruit sweetness. It's much more of a, like I say, like a candy floss sweetness. It might be a little bit too sweet for some, maybe, because it is quite pronounced. It is quite obvious how much the sweetness is. But I really like that a lot. That's really pleasant. That surprised me quite a bit. Right, I'm going to do a quick rinse out, and then potentially we've got a bit of a beast on the cards for the next one. So I shall see you then. Cheers.